Feels like deja vu once again talking about the Buffalo Bills after an overtime loss, another heartbreaking, soul-crushing overtime loss that dropped the Bills to 6-6. They're entering their bye week. They fired Ken Dorsey a couple weeks ago, and I will say that Joe Brady has done a great job so far with this offense, but it hasn't resulted in the wins and the success that they would have hoped. Obviously, dropping a heartbreaker to the Eagles, that could have been a huge win to springboard Buffalo into the season. Now it just feels like they're just stuck in the mud still. Kyle, what do you make of this Buffalo Bills season, and do you think it will continue a down spiral?
Yeah, I mean, the Buffalo Bills have already dropped so many games at this point that we have to start considering the real possibility that the Buffalo Bills are going to miss the playoffs. We need to start considering this to be the case because Buffalo has 6 losses. You have to get to 10-7 to guarantee yourself a playoff spot this year. Maybe 9-8 will get you in on tiebreakers, but you don't want to play the tiebreaker game at this point. So you got to get to 10-7 in this year's AFC if you want to make the playoffs. And the way Buffalo's schedule goes at this point, they're playing at Kansas City still to go. They play the Cowboys at home. They play the Dolphins the last week of the season. Like, it is crunch time for Buffalo as things stand right now if they just want to make the playoffs. And it's absolutely insane that they're talking about just making the playoffs because every advanced metric, every nerd stat, every expected win-loss record and SRS ranking and DVOA will tell you this is one of the 8 best teams in the NFL. Some metrics will tell you this is one of the 5 best teams in the NFL. And the fact that they are, by every metric, one of the 8 best teams in the league this year and are 10th place in the AFC is absolutely crazy. It's crazy that Buffalo is in a position to not make the playoffs at this stage because they've played really well. They've just found these incredibly frustrating ways to throw away football games that they would have won. And I'm not saying that they're like guaranteed to be the 1 seed if all goes right here, but like if they don't throw away that first game of the season against Zach Wilson's Jets, if they don't throw away that game against the Broncos, and they don't throw away that game against the Eagles, they're at least playing the Dolphins in week 18 for a chance to win the AFC East. The difference between them winning the AFC East and them missing the playoffs is such a thin line at this point in the season.
So when we look at the Buffalo Bills, we have to look at, like you mentioned, their strength of schedule, and there's a lot of tough games, but you also look at like the teams around them. I look at the Broncos, they have a fairly favorable schedule ahead of them. The Indianapolis Colts have a fairly favorable schedule ahead of them. The Texans, the same. You see, their best chance might be like the Browns, who obviously have a quarterback issue right now, but they have to essentially, I guess, go 2-1 in those 3 difficult games that we talked about, like Miami, the Chiefs, and the Cowboys. They have to at least win 2 of those games, I think, to realistically have a chance. Obviously, you would prefer those games to be in division, in conference. So you essentially have to beat the Dolphins and the Chiefs, I feel, to really feel good about yourself. If you drop the one of the Cowboys, it's not ideal, but you can work with that one a little bit more favorably. Bills feel like they just have missed opportunities. Like that game against the Eagles, you have the drop touchdown by James Cook. You have the should have been touchdown to Gabe Davis there in overtime that should have won the game. You have Jake Elliott with the leg of the year, that like 60-yard in the rain field goal to essentially still your hearts. Go back all the way to week 1. If you're losing that game to the Jets after they lose Aaron Rodgers for the season, and we know with Zach Wilson, pretty much if they did the water boy strategy of taking a knee the rest of the game, they essentially could have won that game. The Jets weren't moving the ball on offense, and they lost that game. We talked about allowing 30-some points to the Patriots, a Patriots team that will never sniff 30 points probably the rest of the season. They allowed 30 points to them and lose that game. Buffalo is just such a frustrating watch that if you're a fan, you have to be incredibly disappointed with this team because you went into the year thinking, this is our year. This could be the Super Bowl window. You used to talk about the frustrations too with this team, like Sean McDermott. It feels like that might be a high-profile coach to hit the free agent coaching market this year. Feels like he's walking on eggshells the rest of the season. Stephon Diggs, that whole situation, it doesn't feel like Stephon Diggs is going to be on this team in 2024. This felt like it. And if they can't even make the playoffs, I feel like that seals everyone's fate in there. people are getting fired. Who knows what's going to happen with even Brandon being the GM too, because we know that utility at drafting the last few years post Josh Allen, it seems like the Buffalo is really heading for an ugly situation with the way this year has turned out.
Yeah, Buffalo did not adapt accordingly. And this is the interesting place that Buffalo finds themselves in, because ever since last October, when they went into Kansas City and beat Kansas City, from that point forward, like Buffalo Bills fans had reason to hope, because every number told you last year, every advanced stat told you this is the most talented team in football. This is the best team in the league. And they gave up home field advantage. Granted, they did it before the whole DeMar Hamlin thing, so that kind of changed the tone a little bit of that Bills season. But before that happened, that team was giving away home field advantage in the AFC playoffs. And then they lost to Cincinnati in the second round, and it felt like a disappointment. And this year's team is not as good as last year's team for Buffalo. I can say that with certainty. This year's Buffalo team is somewhere between the 5th and 8th best team in the league, and last year's team was number 1 or number 2. So they're not as good as last year's team, but they still should have expected to be like as far as they got last year, right? They should have still expected to make the divisional round of the playoffs, even if it meant getting the break speed off them by Lamar Jackson. Like, they should have at least expected to get back to the second round of the playoffs. And the fact that they're in a position to miss the playoffs altogether is what you might call like scary hours at this point, because you're right, someone is probably going to pay for it, even if it doesn't fix your problem. Like, firing Sean McDermott doesn't fix your problems. The problems have been so wide-ranging in each of their losses, which, by the way, you know how annoying this season has been when I forgot that they gave up 30 points to the Patriots early in the season. That's like the 4th dumbest way that they've lost a football game.
I should clarify 29. I just saw the real number. It was 29, but still, that's a lot for the Patriots. We've seen this Patriots team. They scored 7 points against the Giants this past week. That Patriots team.
I don't think the Patriots have scored 29 points in their last 50 offensive possessions. I think that's a real stat. I'm not 100% sure, but they had like 7 against the Colts, 7 against the Giants. Like, they might not have 29 points in their last 50 offensive possessions. But Buffalo's in this position where, yes, people are going to pay as a result, but they don't have a plan for how to move forward. The whole point of this was just, we're going to go all in while Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs have this window open. And if it turns into not just a disappointment, the biggest disappointment of any football team of the last 5 to 6 years, there has not been a team this good that has missed the playoffs in at least the last 6 years. The closest there's been to that was the 2021 Ravens, but at least we could explain away the 2021 Ravens. It was, they went for 2-point conversions that didn't work twice, and that flipped 1 possession games from wins to losses. And then Lamar Jackson got hurt and they went 0-5 with a backup quarterback. Like, at least we can explain that one away. This one, there's no one thing we can point to that says this is what's wrong for Buffalo, because the general manager didn't hold up his end of the bargain once Josh Allen signed that contract extension. They have not coached well. They fired an offensive coordinator already. Their defensive coordinator retired at the end of the season. And by the way, Josh Allen is turning the ball over like nobody's business. So like, there's been so many different reasons why they've lost so many different games that there is no one thing I can point to and say, if they correct that, then this will be the result that comes of it. And that's kind of a tough position to be in, because just firing people for the sake of firing people like Sean McDermott, I don't think is the answer that's going to solve all their problems.
The problem is Sean McDermott obviously is in charge of hiring the people, and I'm sure he even has some say as far as the personnel that they bring into the room. So he does have some culpability as far as to how this team is assembled and how this team performs on game day. And they weren't performing under Dorsey, and he allowed the Dorsey experiment to go on longer than probably should have. We look at, again, the player personnel issues. You know, you could say some injuries as well. Obviously, Von Miller, when they lost him, he was their big free agent acquisition last year. That hurt them. And 2 years consistently of Tre'Davious White being injured is not good for a team that's trying to compete at a high level. But again, just the miscues inside the game. And Josh Allen, talked about giving culpability. Yeah, his turnover issue is incredibly infuriating, because we look at that interception he had in the Eagles game when they were still up that allowed the Eagles to kind of get back in there, that essentially allowed, I think, what was it, that Jalen Hurts had 3 touchdowns and like 5 passes, something insane like that. And that was really the turning point whenever Josh Allen threw that pick that allowed them to just do a quick 14-point swing on them in that game. Josh Allen has hurt this team too. Like, his decision making is atrocious. And it's something that, unlike some of the other top quarterbacks that we discuss, like, Patrick Mahomes and everything, doesn't put his team in bad positions with the turnovers. Lamar doesn't put his team in bad positions with turnovers. Jalen Hurts, he has the turnovers, but you got to give Jalen Hurts the credit that, like, he's able to will his team to victory. A fourth comeback this year, one of the biggest comebacks and one of the biggest games of the season. And Josh Allen, people are pointing out the 0-5 or 0-6 overtime stat. That's real. That's something. Yeah, it's a small sample size, but it's all we got to work with. So 0-6 in overtime games, 0-5 in overtime games, whatever it is. The fact that Josh Allen doesn't win in that scenarios, I think, is kind of starting to speak volumes the more and more it gets put under the magnifying glass.
Well, it keeps up with the theme of this season, right? Because what have people been saying all year about Travis Kelce, right? Is that Travis Kelce's distracted by his famous singer girlfriend. Well, I can look at Josh Allen and say, Josh Allen is distracted by his new famous singer girlfriend that is keeping him away from paying attention to football, right? That's the explanation that everyone needs at this point, right? Right? That'll explain away all of Josh Allen's problems for the entire season. Wink, wink. But no, the Josh Allen has been fine this year. And the thing that's crazy is, like, even with all the turnovers, he's still putting up one of the top 5 passer ratings in the NFL. They're still the 3rd ranked offense in the NFL. Like, Josh Allen is not playing at an MVP level, but that still doesn't mean the Buffalo Bills should be 6-6, right? Like, you talked about the schedule earlier for the Colts and the Broncos and the Texans and the teams that are, like, right in that mix fighting for the last playoff spot with the Bills. But the thing that the Bills have going for them that other teams don't is that the Buffalo Bills are just better than those teams. Like, the Buffalo Bills are just a really damn good football team that happens to be 6-6 at this point in the season. And Josh Allen is part of the issue. Sean McDermott is part of the issue. The organization appears not to be run very well because they lost 2 coordinators and all of a sudden the whole shit fell apart. So, like, I don't know exactly where Buffalo goes from this point forward. And you mentioned the injuries. That's obviously part of it too. Matt Milano being out for the season was a big deal for them. You mentioned Von Miller coming back. They're putting Leonard Floyd at the other edge rusher position, which has worked great, but Leonard Floyd is obviously a temporary stopgap for Gregory Rousseau, who hasn't been the piece that they hoped he would be. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different things at play here for Buffalo that there is no one clear and concise way forward, but the well-run organizations have a vision for how to turn that thing around. And recent history for Buffalo would suggest that they don't quite have that plan to turn it around, like how the Baltimore Ravens did it, where the Ravens missed the playoffs in 2021, and it was hugely disappointing. And they doubled down on Lamar Jackson, the player they knew was really, really good. They brought in 2 brand new coordinators. They brought in an entire new wide receiver room. And when they did have the one season, they missed the playoffs. You know what they did? They drafted an all-pro safety with that draft pick they got from the season that Lamar Jackson was out, and they missed the playoffs in huge disappointment. So, like, from all phases of the organization, they stepped up and supported Lamar Jackson, and now they're back to being one of the best teams in football. Buffalo's got similar issues they have to correct, and it doesn't look like they're off to a good start in correcting those.
So what's your gut feeling? Do they make the playoffs?
I'm going to say no. Because the Dolphins have the opportunity to do the funniest thing ever at the end of the season to knock the Buffalo Bills out of the playoffs, but you got to get to 10 wins, man, and 10 wins from them this point forward is 10-7. Like, they've pissed away too many games. And this has just kind of been a theme for Buffalo for the last, like, 13 months. It's just pissing away games that they should have won. But they've dropped too many of these, and they have a 15% chance of making the playoffs at this point. They got to jump so many teams. And if one of them gets to 10-7, I think it might be curtains for Buffalo if they're at 9-8.
They have the 5 remaining games, right? So Chiefs, if we give them a loss there, they face the Cowboys the next week. I'm going to at least be generous to say they go 1-1. They face the Chargers, another team that has coaching issues, and who knows what Brandon Staley is going to be by that point. They could be 2-1 in that stretch. They could go 3-1 if they beat the Patriots. And then you have the Dolphins game, which we know what they did to the Dolphins earlier in the year, but Dolphins, I feel like they have to have that game like bookmarked as something that they need to get their revenge in their own way. There's 4-1 possible. It just, they have to beat a team that is considered a tough team here. I mean, if they could come out of the bye week and beat the Chiefs, then we're talking about this team completely differently, right?
Absolutely. And I think there is a chance that they still make the playoffs. It's just the odds, the probabilities right now are 15% chance. They have a 15% chance of making the playoffs, and they can't drop another one of these stupid games. Like, that's the biggest thing for Buffalo right now. They just can't drop another one of these stupid games, because they probably have to go 4-1. And I think they can go 4-1. They just can't drop a stupid game the rest of the season. And I know we just kind of chalked up a win for Dallas in there for them, and they might go into Kansas City and win. They did it last year in the regular season. They could totally go into Kansas City.
I won't put them as 0-2.
But
I struggle to put them as 0-2 in that stretch, just because the Cowboys, we've seen them obviously crush all these like middling teams throughout the course of their schedule. But whenever they face a team that is considered good, you talk about at least a top 10 DVOA team, they haven't looked as good or as proficient. So I think that Buffalo still can get that win. It is going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a close game. But I feel like Buffalo, I still like them in that game, oddly.
Yeah. I mean, say that's the coin toss game, and maybe it's not a 15% chance Buffalo makes the playoffs. Maybe it's a 30% chance that Buffalo makes the playoffs. So,
because, you say 10 wins, right? So let's talk about some of the other teams in the mix. So the Browns, can they get to 10 wins with PJ Walker or Dorian Thompson-Robinson? They have to really win on the backs of their defense. The Steelers, I know they have a Cardinals game coming up here. They'll probably be 8-4 after this weekend. I feel like they're on pace to get to 10 wins, especially if their offense performs like they did post Matt Canada. The Broncos, they do just have a cakewalk schedule for the most part that I feel like they'll be able to exploit to at least get to 9 wins. I feel like they have at least 3 more wins in them the rest of the year. And then you talk about another team in the mix. I think the Texans are just good. So I trust the Texans, I think, are going to win like at least 3 more games. It might actually be 9 wins. I don't know. 9 wins might not be crazy to make the 7th seed, at least, which is not the standard that Buffalo should play up to, but still.
9 might get you the 7 seed, but then you're playing tiebreakers, right? You don't want to deal with the tiebreakers. 10 wins guarantees you a playoff spot. Like, you will be in if you get to 10 wins. You might even get the 6th seed if you get to 10 wins. But there's a good chance that you have, say Steelers win 11, Cleveland wins 10, whatever, and then you have Denver at 9, Houston at 9, and Buffalo at 9. Fighting for 1 playoff spot. You don't want to play that game of tiebreakers to get you into the playoffs with 3 teams at 9-8. If you get to 10-7, it guarantees you a spot. If you get to 9-8, either you're out or you're at the whims of the tiebreakers. And that's not great odds if you're down to tiebreakers with 3 teams who play in crappy divisions. I think that they're in a position where 10 wins is going to guarantee you a playoff spot in the AFC. And maybe they'll fall ass backwards into a playoff spot at 9-8. Maybe that's the win for Buffalo, is that their strength of schedule will win them a tiebreaker. But I wouldn't feel good about being 9-8 and making it in this year's AFC playoffs. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Falcons are 5-6 and going to backdoor their way into the playoffs in the NFC. But in the AFC, you have to probably get to 10 wins to make the playoffs this year.
Well, does Buffalo make the playoffs? That's the question that we're trying to answer here today. Schedule does feature the Chiefs, Cowboys, Dolphins, 3 tough remaining opponents. What do you think Buffalo finishes as? Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias from Juju and Kyle. Stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.